All right, so can you start with your name, age, and where you were born?
So my name is Jeanne Jang, and I was born in Seoul, Korea.
Can you tell me a bit about your family? Were they immigrants? What generation were they?
Grandma was in her 30s, and Grandpa early 30s, and Grandpa was in his late 30s. And Sui, my younger sister, was 3 years old. So I was 7 and she was 3 at the time.
And were you predominantly Korean-speaking household, or was there any English?
Definitely, because I was born in Korea. I spoke only Korean. I was in first grade when we came to the United States, and I remember in Korea, in Seoul, the class actually throwing this farewell party. And I remember thinking, oh, I need to learn English. And they sort of made jokes, everyone in the class made jokes about the English language, right? And how it looked like ramen noodles, that I was gonna have to learn that.
Is there anything that stands out to you, besides language, as because you were obviously still young, but still young enough to remember Korea. So was there anything major or impactful that happened, or that was different when you came to the United States?
When I was little, I thought if you lived in a certain country for a long period of time, you would actually begin to look like people in that country. So I actually sort of sat there when I was 6, 7 years old and thought about oh, what will I look like when I live in the United States for a long time? Because I'm not going to look Korean. I'm going to look, Caucasian. And so I had this sort of I remember distinctly having this little kind of fantasy, thinking about what will I look like, right, when I'm an adult. And I assumed part of that fantasy was oh, I'm going to look I'm going to look Caucasian.
Wow. Yeah, that's insane.
I mean, so because we stayed in Virginia Beach, Virginia for less than a year, and then we moved up to Flushing, Queens, which had a lot more diversity. So there are many more Asians overall, but Koreans. We had neighbors who were South Asian, from India. We spoke Korean at home. And I think part of it was because Grandma and Grandpa in particular saw a lot of his friends who had come to the United States, and in the spirit of, adapting to living in the United States, they spoke English all the time, right? Because they wanted their children to learn English and do well in school. And Grandpa was, definitely wanted that for Auntie Sue and me, but really wanted us to keep our Korean heritage. So the rule was, you can speak English with your friends outside, but at home, we had to speak Korean. It's funny because I think it's just the reality of how quickly kids learn, because, very shortly after coming here, English became very comfortable, right? And when you're speaking English with your friends, you want to speak it at home and you want to speak it with your sister. And Grandpa was very strict about, you have to speak Korean at home. And I remember we would have screaming fights about it and, tears shed. But I'm actually so thankful to Grandpa about, about sort of making us do that, because, my Korean's not great, but it's proficient, and I still speak to Grandma and Grandpa in Korean, as you know, right?
All right. But yeah, what was your
saddest moment? Happiest moment? Well, happiest moment involves you, I think.
Okay, then what was your saddest moment?
I actually think my saddest moment is what we're going through now. And, it's, I was hoping I didn't have to reach for these tissues, but...
they're down there.
I know. I think seeing Grandpa, I think go through Alzheimer's is really hard. I think the hardest part for me is not that, he forgets and things, but it's sort of, Grandpa's spirit that I've always sort of loved and appreciated, is that he's a trailblazer, right? Like, he started his own company when he came to the United States, right? His whole philosophy to everything he does is just try, go for it, right? Like the thing that I've always loved about Grandpa is that, I will, when there's a big decision to make, I'll like think about all the pros and cons, and I'll like think about all the permutations of what ifs and this and that. And then like I'll talk to Grandpa and he'll be like, no, just go for it. Just go, right? Right? You must go, right? And I think seeing him become less certain of himself and more insecure, like losing that sense of confidence, right? And and that spirit of who he is, I think has been incredibly sad for me. I also think it's also, and you and I talked about this, it's really sad for me to see that, like, you are clearly the apple of his eye, right? And even now, like, I feel like the things, sometimes when he's like in a bad mood or slightly disoriented, like if I bring you up, his eyes still light up, right? And I think that the fact that you guys don't have as close of a relationship as you used to makes me sad, because I know, and you and I talked about it, like, I think it makes you a little bit uncomfortable, right, to be around Grandpa as he's losing his memory. But like, and it actually ties back to some of the happiest moments of which is, I remember, and this was only just 2 years ago, right, when he told you those like very silly stories about his college friends with all those like ridiculous nicknames, right?
Right.
Like Big Head and, Chopsticks. And I remember you listening to these stories, and you weren't just being polite, but you were just like genuinely tickled, right, by these stories of what Grandpa went through, and yeah, like that he had these really silly friends, and like it was very reminiscent of the stuff that you tell me about your friends, like, and all the ridiculousness, right? And so yeah, so that, I think going through Grandpa's Alzheimer's is pretty sad for me. But it comes to like one of the, I think one of the questions that you had asked, or that was suggested, right, was if I could sort of say, hey, Owen, keep these things in mind. I want you to continue to be comfortable in who you are, and really enjoy who you are, right? And I know it's hard to do, right? It's really hard to do, but I think that sometimes, like, if you can think of yourself as not yourself, but like, you know what I mean? If you had an out-of-body experience, you can talk to like Owen Park, like, I think you would really like Owen Park, right? My name is Jeanne Jang, and this is my Korean American story.